Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to do a deep dive on domain in standard, domain ramp or control or whatever you want to call it in standard. With standard season coming up, and actually a lot of us have already started standard RCQ season, I wanted to do a deep dive on the most popular deck in standard, because it's the deck you're probably going to be playing against the most. And actually it's the deck that I plan on at least starting the season grinding with, so perhaps you're looking to play with it as well. I want to lead off with the overall strategy of the deck. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to be ramping with cards like Topiary Stomper and Invasion of Zendikar into big boy payoffs like Atraxa Grand Unifier, Nissa Ascended Animus, and Herd Migration. That's going to be supplemented with like control-y cards and removal spells like Leyline Binding, Sunfall, Archangel of Wrath, Depopulate, Wandering Emperor, things like that. Counter spells in the sideboard, and the ability to draw more cards with cards like Up the Beanstalk. Now, even though it's a super straightforward strategy, there's other things involved in this deck. And I wanted to lead by talking about the core cards of the deck. This is the core. These are the 58 cards that I think that you need to be playing in the main deck, and the 9 cards that I think you need to be playing in the sideboard. I do not think these are flex at all. However, the last 2 slots in the main deck and the last 6 slots in the sideboard I think are flex. I think you're probably wrong, or at least you need a really good reason to not play these 58 cards and these 9 cards. Well, let's talk about these. The mana base is really straightforward. We're playing 26 lands to make sure we hit our land drops, being a ramp deck, and we extract a lot of lands from our deck as well. And a lot of these tri-lands, we can cycle. Sage is a utility land, and we're playing 4 Cavern of Souls. Cavern of Souls we normally want to name Angel because it can hit the weird colors for Archangel of Wrath, and it makes Atraxa uncounterable. However, it's important to understand that it's totally okay to just like name dinosaur or plant or whatever so that we can turn 3 our Topiary Stomper. We don't need our angels to be uncounterable. It's more important to hit our mana and hit our ramp and all of that stuff. And you can also name Phyrexian with Cavern of Souls and be able to hit Atraxa and Chrome Host Seedshark, which is relevant once in a great while. I'm going to rearrange the main deck really quick to kind of divide it up into the different types of cards. So these are the 4 kinds of cards in our deck. Up the Beanstalk provides fuel for us for these grindy matchups or these controlling matchups. It replaces itself when it enters the battlefield, and we draw cards off of it whenever we cast Leyline Binding or Sunfall or Atraxa or Nissa or Herd Migration. And so it continues to refuel us even if we end up like getting them countered or getting them killed or whatever. These are a ramp. Topiary Stomper being a 3-mana 4/4 with Vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, you ramp and growth. You put a basic land from your library onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. And it can't attack or block unless you control 7 or more lands. But it's really easy to get 7 or more lands in this deck with the ramp and the land drops and the high mana count. And so Topiary Stomper is really solid as a blocker and attacker in the mid game. And I've applied pressure and beaten people with like just Topiary aggro as they counter my big stuff quite a few times. Invasion of Zendikar is a battle, 4 mana. When it enters the battlefield, you double Rampant Growth, and then it flips into Awakened Skyclave with Vigilance and Haste, a 4/4, and as long as it's on the battlefield, it's a land in addition to its other types, and you add 1 mana of any color. So that's pretty relevant as far as like if it's a card that can destroy an online permanent as long as it's not a land or whatever. But also there's like a cool curve here where you can turn 3 Topiary Stomper, grab your 4th land. Turn 4, play your 5th land, play Invasion of Zendikar, grab 6, 7. Now you have 7 lands. You can attack Invasion of Zendikar with Topiary Stomper on turn 4, flip it into Awakened Skyclave, and now you have access to 2 mana and likely can cast Leyline Binding like on top of all of that. And then imagine if you also turn 2 Up the Beanstalk or something. It is like totally nuts. And you also have 2 4/4s that are attacking, so that's a lot on turn 4, which is just a really cool curve if they don't interact with you in any way. And then the reason we're doing that, the reason we're ramping, are our payoffs. Herd Migration is kind of an interesting payoff because you can pay 2 mana to discard it and search our library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then gain 3 life. So it can keep us alive against the aggro decks by gaining life. Make sure that we're playing our lands for a turn every single turn. And it's totally okay to do that. You know, we are pretty abundant with payoffs, so we don't need to like save Herd Migration if we definitely need the land drop. And then for 7 mana, you can create a 3/3 beast creature token for each basic land type among lands you control, which is normally 5, sometimes 4. Which goes really wide, is a bunch of blockers, also really hard for your opponent to block because, you know, it's 15 damage spread 5 ways, which is pretty difficult to deal with. Nissa Ascended Animus is 5 mana and 2 Phyrexian green, so it could be 7 mana. If you use the Phyrexian mana, it starts with 2 less loyalty, but it starts with a max of 7 loyalty. Its +1 is create an excess green Phyrexian horror creature token where X is Nissa, Ascendant, Animus loyalty. -1 is destroy target artifact or enchantment, and -7 is until end of turn creatures you control gain +1/+1 for each forest you control, and gain trample. So there's 2 reasons for playing this card. 1, it's just like solid to play and just get a big boy. 2, it's really for the mirror match because its minus is insane against a leyline binding on one of our payoffs like Atraxa, or like an Up the Beanstalk, and also it's like definitely a must answer. And if the game goes really long and we have a couple Topiary Stompers or whatever, we can just overrun with this trample and just ultimate Nissa and just kill our opponent. And then Atraxa is like our big boy payoff, is a 7 mana 7/7 Vigilance Flying Death Touch lifelink. Enters the battlefield, we reveal the top 10 cards of our library. And for each card type, we put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into our hand and put the rest in the bottom of our library in a random order. So it's like enchantment, sorcery, battle, creature, land, that kind of stuff. So if Atraxa resolves, a big reason we are naming Cavern of Souls on Angel or on Phyrexian, then we get to refill our hand, and it's also a must-answer threat. And if they answer it with Leyline Binding, we have answers to that, and that's a really, really big deal. Now, as far as our sideboard goes, Knockout Blow is essentially just for mono red. Mono red is a reasonably bad matchup for us, and we just need to dedicate a lot of slots to mono red. Temporary Lockdown is just like a cheaper board wipe for these aggressive decks like Soldiers and mono red and stuff like that, which again, the aggressive decks are pretty good against us because we have a lot of cards that don't really do much on its surface. Negate is to win those counterspell wars. Also good against the control decks, which if we don't hit Cavern, we can kind of struggle with. And then Chromos Seed Shark is just like a really good creature on rate. And if we feel like we need additional threats, or we feel like we're going to be interacted with, or at least if the game is going to go long and we can capitalize on Chromos Seed Shark, we're going to be playing that. Because the main deck is really, really devoted to this control ramp plan, and Chromos Seed Shark kind of bridges that gap reasonably well. So those are the core cards. Let's talk about the flex slots in this deck. These are the flex slots. So the way I think you should build this deck is take these 58 cards and then add 2 of these to it, with Trumpeting Connoisseur being kind of a special corner case that we'll talk about separately. So 58 cards, add, oh my god, I did it again. Add 2 of these cards. So again, we've already talked about Chromos Seed Shark. Depopulate is just like another really, really solid board wipe. The 4th Invasion of Zendikar is really solid, if you really want to bear down and focus on ramp. Virtue of Persistence is a really cool card. I think one of the issues with it is black is a little bit hard to come by in the early game. However, if you do, it's a decent removal spell and you gain life and all of that stuff, and that addresses some of the deck's weaknesses. And it's a payoff card, on its other side, which is pretty sweet. Vanquish the Horde is another board wipe, specifically really good against Soldiers as they go hyper wide. And the Wandering Emperor is kind of like Chromos Seed Shark to me, except maybe a little bit better. Allows it to be a removal spell and also kind of be a threat. It isn't quite good at either of those things, but it bridges that gap really, really well. Now, the reason I have Trumpeting Carnosaur here, even though I said, like, hey, pick 2 of these, and there's a playset of Trumpeting Carnosaur, is there's actually a slightly different version of the Domain deck that plays 4 Trumpeting Carnosaur for value, essentially. And what they basically do is they cut a few of these cards, like the one of, like, if I were to add Trumpeting Carnosaur, I'd probably cut, like, Depopulate Nissa and then jam the 4 Trumpeting Carnosaur. And it's kind of like a different, like, value way to play this deck. And like really, really interesting. It's just like another huge threat. It's also a decent removal spell, all that stuff. I'm personally not a huge fan of it, but I do think it's very good. As far as flex slots in the sideboard go, so you should take these 9 cards and then pick 6 of these. Destroy Evil is really good against the mirror match. It deals with the enchantments really well. It's decent against Esper, and it can kill the creatures, and all that stuff. Depopulate, we've already talked about. You can just play one in the board. Another Negate, which we've already talked about, is really solid. Jace Perfected Mind is, I think, really similar to Chromos Seed Shark in the sense that I think it's really solid against like the long-term grindy decks. I think one big difference is it's actually really good against removal and bad against creatures, where Chromos Seed Shark is kind of the opposite, obviously. But it's for these like really long-term grindy decks like Control or the Mirror Match or stuff like that. Lithomatic Barrage is really good against Soldiers and Esper mid-range, and Obstinate Baloth is solid against the green-black deck, also really decent against mono-red. So I just picked 6 of these to add to your sideboard, depending on what decks you think you're going to be playing against in your own personal RCQ or whatever metagame. Now, this is the deck I'm playing with. Whoops, it's a little bit smaller. So this is the deck that I am playing with. And the deck I'm likely going to start with the RCQ season, the deck that I'm I'm currently grinding on Magic Online and all of that stuff. So let's talk about the flex slots that I chose. Wandering Emperor, I really felt like I wanted that thing to bridge that gap, because I both wanted another threat and a little bit more removal, and Wandering Emperor does, like I said, both of those things a little bit worse, but it's kind of hard to deal with for some decks. And I felt myself losing to Soldiers quite a bit, and Vanquish the Horde is just like the Soldiers killer. Yes, they can counter it or whatever, but it being 2 mana or 3 mana a lot of the time and it just destroying everything means we can fight over it, and it's just scary for our opponent. And then my sideboard is just focus on rounding out these matches, being able to grind with our opponents, more stuff against mono red and whatever, being able to deal with Esper mid-range, and then just like, I'm really, really afraid of these go wide decks, in Soldiers and mono red. But with an understanding of the cards in the deck and why you would choose to play these cards, let's talk about sideboarding. And we're going to talk about how I would sideboard against all of the decks that I think you would reasonably play against on, your RCQs or Magic Online or whatever. So let's go in order of most popular deck from MTG Goldfish. So the most popular deck is the Mirror Match. So in the mirror, we're bringing in negates. It's really solid against the removal, like Leyline Binding, really good against Up the Beanstalk, Herd Migration, Nissa, which we said is, for the Mirror Match, all that stuff. Also allows us to fight over stuff on the stack. And I'm a fan of Seed Shark. Having more threats is really solid. We can kind of stretch our opponent's removal really thin. And this being like a pseudo control mirror, even though there are ramp strategies, having more threats I think is pretty powerful. I'm also a fan of Jace Perfected Mind. Again, these matches are going to go really long in the mirror match, and Jace can kind of like stop that and just like do the mill strategy or draw cards or whatever. Now we're going to bring out Depopulate. It's just not a solid. We just don't need the cheap board wipes, especially board wipes that only board wipe and don't do anything else. Similarly with Vanquish the Horde. I'm also not a fan of Archangel of Wrath like at all. And then we're going to shave 1 Sunfall. Keeping 3 Sunfall in is pretty important because it's the only way we like truly answer Herd Migration. But other than that, this is how I like to board in the mirror match. The second most popular deck is Esper Midrange. Against Esper Midrange, we are bringing in our Seed Sharks. Games can go reasonably long, and Seed Shark is actually a pretty solid blocker, and it's a must answer. We're going to be bringing in our Lithomantic Barrages because it kills the things in our opponent's deck, especially like Rafine. It means we don't have to pay the ward on it, which is super solid. And we're bringing out Nissa. It's just a lot of mana and doesn't really do much in the matchup. And then we're going to shave on Invasion of Zendikar. We just really can't afford to be tapping out on our turn 4, casting Invasion of Zendikar, not affecting the board. And so it's a liability more than anything. And so this is how I sideboard against Esper Midrange. The third most popular deck is Red-Black Midrange, Red-Black Discover, whatever you want to call it. We are bringing in the Obstinate Baloth. That is pretty much it. I like shaving Invasion of Zendikar because we can't really afford to be doing nothing to the board, but it can be good in other scenarios. The dream is to just discard Obstinate Baloth to a Liliana. That's what we're trying to do. The fourth most popular deck is the deck we're a little afraid of, which is Mono Red. We're bringing in the Knockout Blows, the Obstinate Baloth. All these things gain life and do other stuff, which is super, super solid. Bringing in the Seed Sharks for additional cheap blockers. And temporary lockdown to kind of deal with what is going on, deal with the creatures, deal with the, all the scary stuff. Bringing out Invasion of Zendikar for the reasons that we have talked about right up along. Up the Beanstalk, we can't really capitalize on Up the Beanstalk, super easy at all. And then Nissa is just so much mana for what essentially does nothing. And so this is how I sideboard against Mono Red. The fifth most popular deck is Golgari Midrange. Against Golgari Midrange, bringing in Obstinate Baloth. Bringing out Invasion of Zendikar. Same thing as Rakdos Midrange for all the same reasons. The sixth most popular deck is a new thing to this scene that looks really, really cool is Bant Poison. Against Bant Poison, we're bringing in Temporary Lockdown to be able to wipe their board. Lithomantic Barrage because it kills a lot of the stuff in their deck. Chromos Seed Shark because it's a decent blocker. And we're bringing out Invasion of Zendikar for the reasons we have talked about right along. And then a few Up the Beanstalk, again, just because like we can't be doing nothing to the board. We really don't have time to capitalize on it against these like hyper aggressive decks. So this is sideboard against Bant Poison. The seventh most popular deck is Soldiers. We're going to be bringing in Temporary Lockdown. We're bringing, because like it wipes their board. Bringing in Chrome Host Scene Shark because it blocks really well. Lithomantic Barrage because it kills most of the things in our opponent's deck. Okay. And we're bringing out, oh my god. Oh, I just killed it. We're going to be bringing out Nissa because it just is so much mana and doesn't really do anything. Bringing out Invasion of Zendikar because, again, we can't have things that just don't affect the board, like, at all. And then because it's hyper-aggressive deck, we're going to shave on up the Beanstalk because we just really don't have time to capitalize off of it. So Sideboard against Soldiers. So those are the 7 decks that I would deem as, like, really good right now. And so we're going to stop there as far as sideboarding goes, because anything else I think is, like, reasonably corner case, and you should be able to use the lessons that I kind of taught during this to teach yourself how to sideboard against the other decks. But there you have my deep dive on standard domain, ramp, control, whatever you want to call it. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description, especially on Twitter and Discord. I'm trying to grow the communities there. And thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.